I get it. Making music is really hard. Producing music can be extremely discouraging at times, especially when you pull up Spotify after working on your own music just to realize that it sounds like a hot mess compared to what you hear other people making. And then you see that 16-year-old in a crappy home studio on TikTok making insane music that makes you feel even worse, and if you're like me, then just the thought of knowing that there are people like Jacob Collier out there that exist can be soul-crushing. But you need to stop never finishing your songs. And I want you to hear me out because I think I'm gonna share some things with you that'll change how you view not finishing your songs and what you are actually doing to yourself when you do this. Because the reality is that if you never finish songs, you will perpetually be stuck and you will never make the music you actually want to make. Think about this. In a perfect world, if you were making the music that you wanted, it sounded how you wanted and compared to what you hear on Spotify, would those songs be finished or unfinished? And I think I know the answer to that, and so do you. Of course, they are finished. But if right now you're not finishing songs, then how can you expect to get to that scenario? Because a lot of producers want that scenario, but most are forming really bad habits that will make it almost impossible to get there. Now, here's a really tough reality, and I know this is gonna sound quite harsh. If you're finishing only 1 out of every 10 songs, 4 out of every 10 songs, you're really training yourself to be a quitter. And I know in the world that we live in today, that's not really a culturally accepted thing to say. But I'm not saying it as a knock on you. I'm saying this as someone who has been there. I was that guy early on. I never finished songs. I was constantly moving on from one song to the next because I was unhappy with how the previous one sounded, and I just itched to get it over and be done and move on because that last one kind of sucked. And that was the case for me for years, as in several years. And what did that do for me? It made it so that even if the song had a lot of potential, or even if the song was awesome, at the first sign of difficulty or challenge, my gut reaction was to quit because I had trained myself to think that way. I did it so much that at the first sign of hardship, I immediately wanted to quit. It became a habit. My initial thought was not, how do I solve the problem? It was, I should just start something new. And to be frank, that's a really bad habit to form. Imagine if you want to get in shape, right? You want to work out. But in a month, you only go to work out a couple of times total. All the other days you thought about it, right? You gave it a good think, but then ultimately decided, nah, and then go. What you're doing is literally training your brain to quit, to never finish what you start, to not uphold the commitments you made to yourself. You are proving yourself to be a liar to yourself, not to anyone else, but to you. And I get it, that's kind of strong language to use, but it's true. And that's why this is so serious. The more you do this, the more you don't finish your music, the more you show yourself that you aren't trustworthy. Then maybe you'll just never finish music. At least that's what your mind will start telling you. It's a dangerous path because the more you quit, the more you click new project, when you have 10 others that are only 50% done, the deeper you dig yourself into that hole. Okay. Now I know this sounds really negative so far. I promise we're gonna end this somewhere positive. Now here's the second reason why never finishing your songs is so detrimental to your growth in learning as a producer, and it's equally as important. Whenever you leave a project unfinished, you're making a choice between two options, right? Option 1 is to leave and start something else. Option 2 is to solve the problem. And this is why you have to learn to love problem solving. If you can't solve problems in your music, then you won't be able to finish, because the reality is that music making is a bit like solving puzzles. It's problem solving. Music is this big and crazy complex puzzle that we have to solve. You've got a melody and some chords, great, but how do you make that a killer production? That's one big problem to solve, right? There are a lot of moving pieces to do that, and if you're quitting on yourself, then you're making a definitive choice to not problem solve. And I get it, I really do. I know why most choose the option of just starting something else, because problem solving is hard. It's kind of in the name, problem, right? Like when you have a problem, it's usually not a positive kind of word, right? Problem has this negative connotation, but here's the thing. I found that the more that I can love solving problems, the more I can love problems. Like, this is really just a mindset thing, a way of thinking. When you have a problem, do you run away because it's hard, or do you lean in because you're imagining what solving it will feel like? And that's one of the ways you can almost trick yourself into doing those hard things. Stop thinking just about how hard something is, and instead imagine how it's gonna feel when you solve the problem. This whole music making thing, it can be kind of infuriating. Heck, scored a major commercial a few months ago, and the first hour of that project was extremely hard. I tried so many ideas, and none of it fit the commercial or what the brand wanted. It felt too upbeat, then it was too cheesy, and a handful of other problems that I had such a hard time getting into it. But when the rubber meets the road, I have a choice. Am I gonna throw my hands up and quit, or find a way to solve the problem? And guess what? I ended up writing that whole commercial, and when I finished, I didn't feel like the music was actually doing what the client asked for. So I reworked it again, and I made a completely new version. Now, the old me would not have done that, because I would have felt like, it's just too hard. It's too annoying or too this or too that. Instead of thinking, I have something better in me and I can solve this problem, and when I do, it's gonna be awesome. Well, friends, that second version I made won the commercial. It's on television. Now, this goes beyond just finding ways to finish because you just wanna make cool music, but it kind of actually gets into some life lesson stuff, like my job now depends on it. And I know not everyone wants this as a career, but if you do, then I promise you, if you cannot finish virtually everything you start, you'll have a really hard time being successful. Solving problems is a good thing. When you are working on your next song and you run into issues, stop thinking about how hard it is. Stop convincing yourself it'll be just easier to start something new. You need to learn to love the process of solving problems. Love the process of putting the puzzle pieces together. I mean, think about it. We're literally talking about making music right now. What more awesome thing could we be talking about when it comes to problem solving, right? Just think about that, right? You're not finishing because it's hard, but at the same time, it's still making music, which is awesome. Most of the reasons people have for not finishing are not because they can't. It's not because you can't. It's because you're making a choice. If you're finishing less than half the songs you start, then you're forming a bad habit, plain and simple. You're teaching yourself that it's okay to leave something unfinished. And first of all, not to deviate, but that's just not a good way of living your life. I know, life lessons. And second, that's not how you develop yourself into a great producer or musician. So, to end on a positive note, what can you do to help with this? Like, what things can you do that will make finishing easier? First of all, I've already said it, but you need to see problems as opportunities. It's another way of saying it. And instead of imagining how hard it is, imagine how awesome it's gonna feel when you solve it. Change your mindset around problems and change how you think about solving them. Our minds want to do the things that feel good, so find a way to make solving problems feel good. Second, taking a breather is different from quitting. I find that if I sleep on something, I come back totally fresh, like completely fresh ideas. That commercial I mentioned, I didn't make that second version until the next day so that I could sleep on it. And guess what? When I got to work after sleeping on it, it was a piece of cake. I knocked it out very quickly. But the day before, I was feeling completely stuck and very aggravated. So never underestimate how much a solid night's sleep can do for you in helping you solve problems. Sleep is where the creative and problem-solving part of our brain recovers. And maybe you even need to give it a couple days or a few days. That's not the same thing as quitting to give yourself a breather. Third, set a timer when you feel stuck. Now I'm gonna give you a scenario, okay? You're working on a song, you feel stuck, you're getting frustrated, and you start feeling like giving up on it. You're seeing the new project button right there. You wanna click it. Stop, right? Just stop. Stop, pull out your phone, and set a timer for 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how big of the problem it is. And in that time, your only goal is to solve the current problem. Our brains are so much more powerful than we think. When we put a time crunch on something, it's like this magical trick that kicks our brains into a mode that can sometimes solve problems way easier than when we feel like we have all the time in the world to do something. If you have all the time in the world, our brains get lazy. It just doesn't work that hard to solve the problems we have. But when we realize, oh crap, I only have an hour to do that, all of a sudden, it's like, boom, problem solve mode is activated. I'm not saying this works 100% of the time, but it helps tremendously. Just try setting a timer for yourself and get to work. Fourth, when you feel stuck, temporarily go do something you feel great about. It could be music, or it could be something completely unrelated to music. Half of this battle is mental. I think you can probably see that by now. If you feel upset or frustrated, you're already at a major disadvantage. It's gonna be harder to solve those problems. When you're feeling down or you're upset, you are not in the mindset of, let's go, I'm ready to fix this. No, you're probably just feeling like quitting instead. So go for a walk, go work out, listen to music you love, spend time with a friend, go get a coffee, go get some food, whatever you gotta do to change your attitude and get into a better mindset. When we have a negative outlook, then that will 100% bleed into the music you make. That'll make an impact on how you solve the problem, or even if you can solve it at all. If you can get out of that negative mindset and instead change your mind and do something that can make you feel better and feel more energized, then that will help you get through the problems and find creative ways to solve them. Now, if you wanna hear some more practical ways to learn this, to learn production faster, and stop wasting time, then you need to watch this video right here, because I go through several ways to improve your productions in a very practical way. It's already helped tens of thousands of people. We'll see you there.